Hey, this is your host, Ron. I'm so glad you could join me for today's Global Vault podcast. The purpose of the podcast is to tell the story of how God is working among the peoples of our world. I look forward to spending the next half hour or so with you. So welcome to the Global Vault podcast. It's just good to have you again here. And we have privilege today of talking with our friend Dycke. He's been 20-some years working in France. And so we're going to have a little bit of a window into what God is doing in France and just feel a little bit about what's going on and how we can continue to pray for that area. So welcome, Dycke, to our podcast today.
Well, thank you, Ron, for having me.
Okay. I really want to start with your dad because you have kind of a history there. I've met your dad, a wonderful man of God with a long history in Montreal. But can you just go back even a little bit further, kind of in the sense of where did he come from and how that brought you into the world as well?
Sure. My dad was born in China, and when he was at the age of 2 or 3, both of his parents passed away. So he was actually raised in an orphanage by an American missionary by the name of Ruth Hitchcock. So she adopted my dad as one of her sons, and my dad called her mom. So he was raised by this great mom, and so as a result, his life was preserved, and he was being raised in a Christian background. So when he grew up, he was convinced that God called him to go to Bible college. So he went to the Alliance Bible College in Guangzhou, and that's where he met my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And so soon after, communists came to China, and they fled. The Alliance Bible College relocated in Hong Kong. So that's where my mom and dad graduated, the first class in Hong Kong. And soon after that, they got married and they went to Vietnam as missionaries. So that's how it all came to be. So all my siblings, and including me, 7 of us, we were all born and raised in Vietnam.
Oh, okay. So Chinese background in a way, but that was their background for you. Your background was Vietnamese. So then how did you get from Vietnam then to Canada?
So after serving 18 years in Vietnam, my dad felt maybe the time has come for him to pass on the baton. And so we left, and we passing by Hong Kong, Vietnam, and then 1972, we settled down in Montreal, Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So Montreal has become my second home. That's where I was raised and received my high school, college, and university education.
Okay. So your father then too was, he's pastoring now a church. That's where he had a long...
Correct.
Yeah. How many years did he pastor in Montreal?
So Dad started actually, even before we went over to Montreal, we spent 2 years in Taiwan, and my father first came to Montreal first, and that's where he started the first Chinese Alliance Church in Montreal. And he is still alive. He's 92.
92
this
now,
year.
yes.
Still quite alert and healthy. And God bless him. And he has, he's still quite independent. And he lives in Ottawa. And the Ottawa church still invite him to preach on a regular basis.
There.
And we thank God for his health. And also his mind is still quite sharp. So he has a Facebook.
Oh, okay.
So he writes regularly, and he has quite a few friends, all the way back to, Hong Kong and Taiwan and even Vietnam.
Okay.
Yes.
You have to be careful what you're saying because he might listen to this podcast. So
perhaps.
say hi, Dad. Yes.
Yes.
when you moved then, growing up in Vietnam, so I don't know what age you were when you arrived in Canada. Any memories there? What was different about Canada after spending your early years in Vietnam? Do you have any memories of what hit you there?
Yes, I came to Canada at the age of 12.
Okay.
And so I still have many good memories in Vietnam, although I was young. We live in a city, and we didn't see much fighting or the worst part of war during that time. And so we were sheltered, in the city, and we're confined to the church building. We live in a church. And so, by the grace of God, we left Vietnam before the collapse of the Vietnamese Republic government. Mm-hmm. And so, when we first landed in Montreal, I guess the first thing, it was cold. It was in the cold January.
Winter time, yeah.
I'd never seen snow before, and I didn't speak a word of English. So we went to the language school along with my siblings, and we struggled along, and it was some tough time the first few years, but we loved the city. We loved the Canadian culture, and that's where I grew up, and I enjoy watching the Montreal Canadiens playing hockey, and I received my high school, my cégep, college education there, and later on I went to Concordia and studied film.
Okay, so what was your interest there at Concordia? I mean, you said film and the arts, so how did you get interested in that particular area?
Yeah, I would say because of my upbringing, my dad and my mom, they are both quite non-traditional Chinese parents. They pretty much let us explore whatever we liked to pursue. So unlike some of my classmates or my peers, during their childhood time, they were told, this is where they should go along that route.
Yeah.
So I was never too good in sciences, nor math, nor this and that. And I found out that I'm pretty much have no other choices but get into creative arts in cégep, and I got accepted in film studies. And I enjoy my studies at university, and so it was through those 3 years, actually, by watching lots of foreign films, and I came to know the world outside of North America. And that's how I developed the interest of, if I grew up one day, one thing I can do is to travel, to see the world. And so during that time as well, most of my professors at university were, in their teaching, I think, method, they were, I think, pretty much, you can tell, anti-Christians. Very liberal, very critical of Christianity. And so the film that I watched as well, pretty much, one in particular by Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman, and he is actually a well-known, established filmmaker, but most of his films were pretty much with very heavy anti-Christian themes. And so as a result, that has tremendous impact upon my spiritual journey. I was almost at a crossroad. I had one foot stepping outside of the church door, and yet not willing where to turn to. So then I said to myself, if one day after completing my film studies, if I had a chance, I would like to find out more about my faith. And so that's where the door was open for me. So 1984, after I graduated from university, I made up my mind to go to Regina. and to at least to do 1 year of theological studies.
Yeah, that's where Canadian Theological Seminary was
Correct.
located in Regina.
Yes.
So,
And so-
seminary.
So many people ask me, why are you here?
Yeah.
I said, I felt as if I was at the wrong place because most of my classmates were there to become a pastor.
Sure. Yeah.
And some they say they were called to be a missionary.
yeah.
I said, wow. I said, I just want to know more
About,
about my own
theology.
belief.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So thankfully, after 1 year, I felt perhaps I would like to pursue furthermore. Maybe God had a place for me to complete my studies.
Sure.
So as I look back, this is how I felt God called me into the ministry, although at the time I was not aware of that. And so I completed my studies, 1986. And soon later, my home church pastor from Montreal, Thomas Chan, gave me a call. Would I be considered going back and to serve as a youth pastor? Then I kiddingly said, well, since Steven Spielberg didn't answer my letter.
That's right.
And so
that door's not open.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, I might as well. And so that's how it all started.
Sure, yeah. Well, okay, so now as I keep thinking about this and our listener here, I'm thinking, okay, here's somebody who's majored in film studies and gone that direction. How does a person like that end up in France? And how do film studies help me in my work as an international worker? So
Okay.
can you tie that together for us?
Yes. During my 7.5 years serving in Ottawa, and thankfully, I have had several short-term mission trips.
Okay, yeah.
Now, during those days, in the early 90s, it was not something quite popular yet, short-term mission trips. But the church gave me this opportunity to go out and learn. So I remember I have had trips to Suriname, to French Guyana. And then 1994, I was given half a year sabbatical to Paris, France. And that completely changed the direction of our ministry. As if in those half a year serving in France, God has opened a new window for us. My wife and I, we saw there's another field where it has been neglected. There are more than, at the time, there were more than 300,000 Chinese living in Paris, but only a handful of churches. So after that 6 months of sabbatical leave, we came back, we pray about it, and so we then decided to apply for this international ministry.
Yeah, okay. So for me, as I think the traditional way of thinking about missions, we're often thinking of, we know David Livingstone, and we think of Africa, and we think of, parts of Indonesia, Papua. So that's a new idea then to think, okay, is a country in the Western Europe, like France, we wouldn't use the word mission field, but in a real sense, you're going there and seeing that there's great need, and there's just people that need to hear about Christ. So you worked, what's the big picture, let's say, just even if we talk today now, of the family of churches in France?
Right. Back in actually 1992, I remember when we first proposed to do a short-term mission in Paris, my home church in Ottawa, some of the leadership were questioning our motives of going there.
Yeah.
Why go to Paris and not to a city or a jungle, I don't know, somewhere in
That's right.
in Africa.
Paris would be a nice place to live, right? We would all want to do that.
So it took us a hard time actually to defend why we want to go there. It's because the local church inviting us to help out their children ministry. And so we went, And lo and behold, we discovered that there is a big pocket of Chinese, almost, I think, have been neglected, and they were in great needs, and we can contribute and to help out. And so 1996, we were approved and to be sent out to Paris. And many people still asking the question, why Paris? And so we politely and gently often explain to those who were asking the question, that is Paul in his days, in the book of Acts. Paul, when he went out to do mission work, he always have big cities in mind. Cities such as Corinth, Athens, Rome, Philippi. I think we chose Paris because Paris is a strategic city with lots of Chinese. And Paris is a city where we think we can establish our first strong foothold. And then we can launch other mission work and so on. And so lo and behold, over the past 22 years, we worked alongside with the alliance partnership with the U.S. and also with Hong Kong. And when we first went, there were only 2 Chinese alliance churches. 20-some years down the road, by God's grace, we were able to establish now more than 26 Chinese alliance churches in the Silk Road. And most of them are in the continent of Europe and the UK. And so there's still a lot more work to be done, because in Europe and the UK, there are more than 1.8 million Chinese living in this diaspora. And so there are a lot more work can be done if we can have more workers. I think this is where we're at now.
Yeah. And you've had some, I'm just thinking of connections with North Africa as well. Can you talk a little bit about that and say a trip that you made?
Yes. It is interesting to see how God opened door for us. Most of the North African countries and West African countries were once upon a time colonized by France.
That's right, yeah.
And so I was in the year of 2004, I received an email. I think that's how God speaks to us sometimes nowadays. An Algerian pastor wrote us through some mutual connection, that he heard that we're from France and we speak Mandarin. And he inviting us to go to Algeria because there's a big group of Chinese workers in his country. And so lo and behold, I went for the first time in early 2000. And as a result, I discovered that there are more than 80,000 Chinese workers, merchants, families living in that country, completely neglected. Not even one single Christian community among them. And so as a result, Morocco, Tunisia, and even Egypt. So we came to realize Chinese are now coming from mainland China to these countries and work and establish their community there.
Yeah, and many of them are hired by company. They're construction workers, right? So I mean, there's just tremendous amount of construction going in these cities, especially, and they're the ones that do it, right?
Yes. Yeah. Especially now, because of there are fewer European tourists going to these countries, and so Morocco and Tunisia, they're now open to Chinese tourism.
Oh, okay.
And they can go without a visa. So you can imagine Chinese tourists are now flooding North African countries, not only to visit, but they're there to explore the potential for them to stay and to
work there.
Work there.
Yeah. Dick, do you have some stories? We're always interested in how is God working? What are ways that we see people moving from darkness to light, lives changed or transformed? Can you give us a couple of stories from your life?
Maybe just one story.
Okay.
How's that? We do have a coworker by the name of Kitty, and so we usually call her Hello Kitty. And this sister, she now is one of our dearest coworkers on the same team. Before she became a Christian, Kitty came from Hong Kong and settled down in Paris. She was once upon a time a powerful ringleader. Her specialty was operating these mobile gambling center. She made lots of money by doing these illegal gambling businesses. And so as a result of one tragic family event, God has changed the life of Kitty. Her daughter, at the age of 18, while taking a bath, was electrocuted and passed away. And so while Kitty was in this tragic event, she was sifting through the journals that her daughter wrote in the past. And she came to discover that her daughter was a Christian. And so during that critical time, she didn't even know whom to turn to. Well, since my daughter was a Christian, she should conduct the funeral service in a Christian manner. So she approached the local Alliance Church. And so because of that, slowly Kitty became interested in the gospel, and then she became a believer. And not only that, her life completely changed by Jesus. And so after she became a Christian, she got baptized, and she went to a Bible college in the UK and received her theological training. And after completed her studies, she came back to Paris. And she started a center in the heart of Chinatown in Paris, reaching out to those who are living in the marginalized.
Marginalized people. Yeah.
Reaching out to the marginalized Chinese.
Okay, yeah.
And so because of her previous background, and Kitty has been quite effective reaching out to many of those who are addicted in gambling. And as well, recently there are many ladies who came from different parts of China, and they perhaps came to a point where they have no way to turn around, and they became prostitutes. And so Kitty saw that and lining up on the street in the heart of Chinatown. And every year during certain Chinese festival, the autumn moon festival, she would especially prepare certain, we call them moon cake. It's a sweet where we celebrate the autumn moon festival. We would eat them, and she would have them prepare maybe tons of them and go down to the street and hand out these sweets to these women who work on the street. And then along with that, she would write them a card telling them that Jesus loves you. And so a lot of these ladies, as they receive these sweets from Kitty, they would move to tears. And some of them would be willing to come to church service with her. So we thank God for Kitty's ministry at this point. Because of her ministry, she started this center and now reaching out to not just dozens, but hundreds of many desperate Chinese who are still living in the dark.
Yeah. Well, as we wind down here, just maybe to fill out the picture, we have a broader alliance family working. So we've looked here kind of what's been going on, and you work within the Chinese diaspora in France. What are some of the other things that our alliance workers are doing from North America in terms of church planting, and what does that look like?
Yes, France has always been a U.S.-led field, and so we do have 20-plus U.S. CNMA personnel work in France, Paris area, and southern France. So we're the only Canadian couple. And so in the whole of France, we do have a CNMA national union with 33 established CNMA churches.
So these are local French
correct
churches. So 33 Alliance French churches.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
With their own pastors, leaders.
Plus, alongside with the international workers.
Okay.
Helping alongside with it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Well, thanks so much, Dycke, for coming in today and helping us understand a little bit more about that. And we think we will just end there. And if a listener wants to continue to pray for what God is doing in France, you've heard some of the things and that we could pray for. There's still many people that yet don't know Christ and the need to plant churches, and maybe even for somebody to move there and join our team there in planting churches or doing other ministries. So thank you, Dycke, for coming in. We'll have some of the outline and things on our show notes later on, so that'll show a bit more of what God is doing there and some links to these things we've been talking about. So thank you for being with us today, and we'll be back again with another podcast in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
Hi, this is Christy from Niger. Thank you for checking out the Global Vault podcast. For more information on the Global Vault, including more episodes and resources, please visit our website at globalvault.ca. Fofo, mietima, jomerao hokumajam.